Okay, before the break, we kind of clicking around in Blender, looking at a few things there. Just make sure you take some time and play around with it. Try to make some random shapes and get some practice with it because it does take practice. Which I have had lots and lots and lots of practice at this. I first saw 3D modeling back when I was a freshman in high school. Freshman in high school would have been 92, 93 school year. Way before most of y'all were probably born. So I've been around 3D modeling for quite a while and I've been interested and kept playing with it along the way over the years. And when I got the engineering tech degree, that was mostly 3D modeling because that's the main technology that engineers use, is modeling their designs in advance so we can see what they're going to be like. So I've had decades of practice with it and formal training in it. So it things that might make look easy, you'll find takes several attempts. Oh, and then the normal that I practice the lectures beforehand so we don't waste our class time. We're restricted on time here, but all the lectures are recorded. So especially for something like this, kind of watching along, trying to follow, clicking around on things, be good, but it'll be a whole lot easier to follow along when you're watching the video and you can pause and rewind. And also with Blender, that's the standard Blender tutorial you will see is something on YouTube where you can pause and rewind and see what they did. There are lots of those. So many that it's hard to find the getting started with videos because of all the fancy features. I did go ahead and grab the one from first time I taught this course. It might have been a bit much for our Blender example then was this little dragon. So that started as one cube. I expanded. Oh yeah, it's still, I didn't rename it, so it's still called cube. Eventually it became an arm or a child of an armature. Like we did the other day, the skin is the child of a skeleton, or the skeleton is the parent of a skin. And then we animated the wings flapping, just one little thing. Then there was also some castle pictures and the fireball pictures of the dragon like flew through the sky up and down and launched fireballs down and destroyed castles that were just randomly placed in the game. But that took a little while. I can give you this file as well, because then you can start with this. Stop those wings. Go into edit mode and you have a whole bunch of vertexes and polygons and stuff to play around with, or to take a look at and see how things get moved around into that final shape we want. I'll send that out as well. That was a bit much though for a class last semester, so I learned quickly to try to simplify it. So we also kind of planned this out. We're going to make a snowman. A snowman is going to go in games with other characters, NPCs, backgrounds. We wanted it to be about the right proportions. So quickly in the planning, just came up with some rough numbers of about the height a snowman should be. That's right around 5 feet. Shorter than my original plan, 1.5 meters is actually that, unless I'm doing the math wrong, 1.5 meters, 4.5 feet, 4.9. So, so it's that's about the size a snowman would be. And when we add a top hat on top of it, they'll be around 5 feet. We want a huge top hat, right? Only go with the short top hat. Give us around 5 feet for a game character, which will fit nicely in front of backgrounds or around human NPCs or something. So I'm going to start with the big snowball here, and the snowball's easy. That's just a big circle. So add a mesh, and there's two spheres. You'll notice icosphere. There's a bunch of triangles, and they look a little jagged. If I add the other sphere, add a mesh UV sphere. It's made with squares, and it looks a lot. There's a lot more of them. They look smoother. So probably want to start with the UV sphere, and then looking at this picture on the board. Right now, we can see that sphere. The middle of the sphere is at 0, 0, 0. But we probably want the spot right below our feet, like in between the feet, to be 0, 0, 0. That's where we're going to think about the character standing on the ground at, right? So we need to move this up, and we could just grab the arrows and drag it. But we're on a computer, so it can be a little bit better to type it in. Everything's in meters still, so it's showing the meters. You can change to any unit you want. There's a measure thing over here so you can see how big stuff is. So right now this is 2 meters, and it was at the origin. So I'll delete that ruler. So from 2 meters across, need to get that down to 0.6. And a nice little trick is to do that in 2 steps instead of 1. Because 2 meters across means it's going to have a 1 meter radius. But I'm thinking about diameters, so it'd probably be easier to adjust to a 1 meter diameter and then find 60% of that. So you'll notice that right now it gives a floating point number. So if we look at our scale data first, it's a 100%. So if we do 50% in every direction, now we should have a one meter diameter on that. And that's an easier starting point. I almost always do that with cubes and spheres, because it's easier to start with 1 meter and think about the scale percentage from 1 instead of from 2, because all that doubling is going to make the math harder. If we start with 2 instead of 1, all the math is twice as hard to figure out the numbers we actually want. So 50% on each one. And then if you put your mouse back in the layout area and push Control A, what we would normally use for selecting, Control A, we can reset that as our transformation. So if I come back and set all transforms for that, so now that 1 meter diameter is our 100%, which makes it easier to get back to that thing we were thinking of, that quick rough thought beforehand of 60 centimeters or 60% of a meter. Well, if 1 is 1 meter, then 0.6 would be 60 meters. Then I'm not necessarily going to reset that one. Just kind of, I'll leave it at 0.6 in case the numbers need adjusted later. I like to reset everything to that one meter starting point. Makes it a whole lot easier to adjust. So then that needs raised up though. Well, we can tell from the placement it put the center at the origin. So we're measuring at the center. So if we actually want the ground to be down here under the feet, we need to add the 0.5, 0.3, and then half of the 6. So 0.3 up through this one. So we'll need to come up 0.6. So on the z-axis, come up 0.6 and put that in the right location. This is a programming thing. That's why I want to make sure and do the numbers, not dragging the mouse around so it looks right. A little bit of forethought on how you want it to be. Because this is going to be an object in our game, so it's going to interact with other objects, so we know what size it's going to be. We have some rough ideas about it already, so we know the numbers. Treat it like programming. And that makes a big, big difference. It will save you a lot of work later too. Then you won't have some things that are 50 feet, one character that's 50 feet tall and another character that's 3 inches tall. You don't realize it until you get to go to put them in the game because you were zoomed in. You had the appropriate zoom level for working with both of them. It's like, oh, those 2 guys should be the same height. So a little bit of forethought, and it's inputs, but approach it like programming. You know what the number is, or at least a starting point, and you can adjust it from that afterwards. I'll do the same thing for another part of this snowman, which actually I skipped a step of what I wanted to do. So I'll put in another UV sphere. And then the very first thing, I'm going to cut that to 50% on each axis. And what I did is just click and type in there and then hit enter or tab to go to the next one. And then oh, okay. Can you all hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Not sure what happened. The internet went down here. I can't just for a moment. So I just did the duplicate, and I noticed the camera cut off, so I'm going to delete that. Shift D will make a duplicate of stuff. Is that where the video cut off? Anybody see all along? I think it was a duplicate of that sphere. So I reset it to those dimensions. And I usually like to, notice we can drag it around and put it wherever we want it. And when we click, then it's placed. I'm gonna hit undo. What I like to do is make that duplicate and just drag it off to the side to make sure it works. And then I'll push escape. And it still exists, but it's at the same spot as the original one. Then we can do those nice little adjustments.
Exactly. All right, sorry.
So our second snowball is 0.4. So for the scale, since we already set it to 1 meter, which hopefully that was in the video. I'm not exactly sure where that cut off. It's still recording, right? Yes. Oh, whoops. So set it to 0.4. And notice how it's completely inside of that other sphere right now. Can't get in there and grab it. But I know where it needs to be as far as location. It's going to come straight up 0.3, then another 0.6, and we're measuring to the center. See how we're approaching the graphics like programming, not dragging our mouse around drawing a picture. We're thinking about it like we would anytime with any program we write. So we have a nice GUI to put together our program. Because really we're building a Python script in the background. I already showed you one of those. So 0.3, 0.6 is 0.9, another 0.2 to get halfway through where it needs to be will put us up 1.1. So on the Z-axis, and look at the colors. So it's pretty standard that Z is blue, X is red, and Y is green. But what's not standard is which one is up and down, which one's left and right, which one's forward and backward. So make sure you know what you're working with. Because like here in Blender, you'll notice Z is up, and to go from X to Y, we go in a counterclockwise direction in the positive. But when we go to Unity, it's one of the two most popular game engines that reverses or changes. Y is up, and X and Z are the plane, the ground we're walking on. And to get from the positive X to the positive Z, we go in the clockwise direction. So the axes are completely reversed. Whereas Unreal has the same ones as Blender. So it's different depending on where we're going, how those various axes play out and stuff. So you always have to pay attention to that, and the colors are pretty standardized. So, well, it's in order: red, green, blue, X, Y, Z. So that's where that standardization comes from. And now we can do our top snow, the head of our snowman. We already rescaled this. I set that down and made a duplicate of it. So I meant to do that the first time, just duplicate it after rescaling it. Remember, after you scale it down, push Control A to lock in all the changes. 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, so 20 centimeters on that. And once again, just add up all the numbers. 0.3 and 0.6 gives us 0.9. Plus 0.4 brings us up to 1.3. And halfway to the middle of this one will be another 0.1, so 1.4 up. I guess that would have been easier to go from the top down. We know the total is 1.5 total in height. So the center of the top one is 0.1 down. That would have been easier than going from the bottom up. But there's the basic shape for a snowman. Except that we would never be able to balance snowballs like that, right? Not quite how snowballs flat. So what I'm going to do is grab this middle one here and just drag it down until it looks right now. That's about what snowballs would look like balanced. I'll do the same thing up here. Drag it down. Okay, that looks more like what a snowman would look like. So I started with the numbers and then did some fine adjustments afterwards. And typically what I would do is after doing those mouse adjustments where it looks right, I would come over here and find some nice numbers to work with. So that looks like it's really close to 1.2. So I'm going to make that 1.2 to work with that one, or this one. Looks like it's really close to 1 evenly. A little bit further down. Nope, not that far down. 0.95. That looks better. Make those adjustments, and then I'll come over there and click and get the numbers back on track to make the match a little bit easier to work with. So the original picture, the numbers are off now, but it's starting to look more like a snowman, right? Color's a little off. We don't really have any color here. We're just looking at that generic color shape. So let's go ahead and look at that next. Because we need more than just colors. So I'm going to select one of them. I'll start at the bottom. And over here on these menus on the right, down near the bottom, there's these two. One looks like a checkerboard says textures if you hover over it. And right above that is one, I think it's supposed to look like a sphere. It always makes me think of the radioactive icon. But the little circle one is how we define a material. So click on the material option, and you'll see a new button. So color is not quite enough when this loads. Color is one of our options, but we need other stuff like what's the subsurface of that color? Trying to think of an example. Well, like think about primer on a wall. People in the room can see it. If I turn the camera over here, for those not in the classroom, whoops, you can see that one of the walls here in the class is painted green. But it's not just green, right? Underneath that, there's primer, probably other layers of paint, because I thought they scraped it all the way back down to the drywall. And that green would look different depending on what color's underneath it. So there's layers of colors that make up things, that make up the paint material. And if that same green was painted over a blue, it would look very different than if it was painted over a red. So the color underneath makes a difference. And it doesn't stop there. If we keep going down that little list there. Keep going down our little list here, not just the subsurface, but is it metallic? Like how shiny is it? Shiny or dull? Specular, how much does it reflect or absorb light? Anisotropic, how roughness, sheen, put a clear coat on it. And just the color alone isn't enough. We need to actually simulate a material, because in 3D modeling, we're going to rely on light to behave in a natural way. How the shadows fall on it, how the light reflects off of it. So a lot of spots for color, but for starting out, you probably just want the top box and pick a color. Just color has to be part of a material. I'm going to move that just slightly away from white, just a little bit towards the blue, but not very much. Let me click on that again. This uses HSV colors. If you haven't seen that before, instead of RGB, we go around a circle. So like 0 degrees, looks like they're starting measuring from down here. 0 degrees is red. And when you come a third of the way around the circle, so an angle of rotation of 120 degrees, a third of the way around the circle, then we're to green. And it fades slowly between them. Another third of the way around the circle gets us to blue. Then we come back around the last third of the circle, we're back to red. And then how far in or out we are. So that's the U going around the circle. How many degrees, how much do we rotate around the circle tells us the basic tinting, red between red, green, and blue, or the mixture between them. It's like red and green make yellow, or red and blue make purple and pinks. And you can see it on the picture there. And then the second number, the saturation, is how dense is it? You think about like tie-dye shirts, are a good example. You just barely touch, you start with a white t-shirt and you just barely touch the dye, or do you stick it there and then go get lunch? Right? There's a big difference in the color that's going to come out afterwards. How much of the dye would be absorbed into the shirt? Or a brand new shirt versus one that's been washed 50 times. The color saturation fades out. And then V is like, V is this number.
The value.
Yes. Value, you might also see L and B. L originally stood for luminosity, but a lot of people say lightness anymore. So how light or dark is it? And B for brightness. Different things, they apply the same way, but how the grayscale, how light or dark is it? And then alpha is transparency, just like it is in RGBA colors. We just always write the A because we don't have an alpha key on our keyboard. So we'll pick something that looks roughly white. And right now we're still seeing that generic material. And if we double click on it and name that snow, And then up here, there's different ways to view our thing. Up in the top right of the layout area, we can look at a wireframe or the shape itself, the generic appearance to it with no colors. The third one is looking at the materials. So there's that white color. And the fourth one's rendering, but we don't have a light in here, so it's not going to render correctly anyway. If we had a light, it would look much, much better. When we get around to putting a light in here in about 20 minutes, it'll, the rendering one will definitely be the best looking one. But right now we don't have any light, so it's like a snowman in a dark room. It kind of a silhouette there, which I guess that's a good a good example of how this stuff sort of, we're simulating the real situation. So this one has a material. If we come up here, there's no material applied. We do have to apply the material on each particular one. You'll notice there's a little drop down arrow here. So instead of right next to the new button, there's a little drop down and we can add the materials that are already created. Which that one almost looks like the generic one. If it was red or green, it would stand out a lot more. That looks like the close color. But now all of them have that same snow material. I guess there's a couple more parts to it. I'll do a cylinder next. And this one I'm going to eyeball what it needs to look like. So it's way too big. This next up, I'm thinking the top hat for the snowman. The feet are just extra so we can cover the animation. So that's way too big. So first thing I'm gonna do is push S and scale it down. And I like to select the move tool because it gives us nice little grab handles. Because if I just push S, no matter where the mouse is at, it starts scaling from there. So I find those little move handles on the arrows a nice place to keep track of things. So I just grab there and scale down, bring it up here. That's still way too big. Scale it down some more. That looks about the right size, right? So you're probably going to do a lot more of that here at first than typing in the numbers. I just wanted to mention the numbers. Could go down a little bit more, maybe scale. Because the top hat should be right about as far around as the head it's sitting on. That'll work. Now I'm going to do that thing we did earlier to get the brim of the hat. I'm in edit mode. We have all those vertices. Notice it makes a difference which one was selected. I come back to object mode and select maybe the middle sphere here. When I go in edit mode, those are the ones that have access. So you want to go in object mode and select just the one you want. And then in edit mode, if we select all those vertices along the bottom, just the bottom side, and then push E and extrude something out just a little bit out. Then we can put S to scale it. So E to extrude that bottom out a little bit, and S to scale it out in every direction. Because it's really just a flat surface is all that was selected. So it comes straight out. Now it kind of looks like a top hat, right? And that's how we build up our models. We just make each shape separately. In an actual game, there's probably a better chance that you would make the top hat separately than some snowman. Because then you have the option to like change hats. Make a bunch of different hats and choose which one you wear. That might be a good thing to practice. It's probably not too difficult to make a hat, right? Or at least the model of a hat. A hat definitely shouldn't be white though. So we'll make a new material. and choose something way down there. Starting to look a little bit more like a snowman. Actually, the hat on there really made it start to look like a snowman, but a few more pieces. Snowman's gonna have a carrot for a nose, right? So I'm gonna add a carrot. And another one that's gonna be different depending on where we're working at is which one's forward? We can tell Z is up and down here. You know, tell which one's forward from looking at that? It's hard to tell, right? And Blender, Y is considered forward. So X is the horizontal that we're looking at. Y is towards us and away from us. As far as when we register this in like game and all of that stuff. So we do have to pay attention to what that is for the software. So Blender considers positive Y forward. So that's probably the direction we want the nose carrot to go. So first thing I'm gonna do is rotate it. So I'll push R to rotate. And then in order to point towards Y, I only want to rotate around the X. So I'll push X. So R, X, and now I only have 1 degree of rotation available. Anybody want to say something? Should the carrot point up or down when we stick it in there?
Straight out.
Straight up. We can do that. I'm just trying to, there's lots of different options on how we stick a carrot in a snowman's nose, right? And it's going to look very, very different. Actually, when we put it on the face, you'll see what I'm talking about. So that's way too big. So I'm going to scale and go make it really, really small. And notice we talked about that before. When we pass the negative, it gives us the mirror image. That's a really easy thing to code for. I'll make it really small and kind of move it up here by the head. It's still way too big. Scale down. There we go. Still way too big, but the proportions look a little bit off, right? A carrot's gonna be long and not very big around. So next I'm gonna hit S to scale and just Y this time and make a nice long thing that looks kind of like a carrot. And then I'll hit S and scale the whole thing down overall until it seems about right next to the snowman's head there. Looks good. Come over here, give it an orange color, and also probably some other stuff as well eventually, but we're kind of restricted on time. And then just move it into place where it goes by our snowman. Oh, and I guess for what I was kind of asking about there, if I push R and rotate it up a little, the snowman looks very different than if we select it and push R and rotate it down a little or straight out. Almost one of those looks friendlier than the other, right? The snowman's carrot nose points up, it just looks friendlier for some reason. You may have noticed that in your life. When little kids put the carrot in, they're coming from below, and their snowman looks meaner than when an adult makes the snowman, and it comes in from the top. People usually just go with it because the one the parents make looks friendlier than the one the kids make. But for our snowman, I'll point it up a little bit. Looks like it's not quite pointing straight out again, but that might just be the angle. And really, I guess it doesn't necessarily even matter. What's next? Eyeballs. So see how we're just adding shapes till we get the one we want. I'll put a cube in here. that's way too big, but I'm looking at the material scenes here, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'll just use that same material, the black one, and make something that looks like coal, so that's way too big, so scale it down. Move it up here by the head, so you can see it next to it. Scale it down, something like that. Maybe a little bit more. And I'll rotate it just a little off center. And just try to find a place to stick it in there. And then we can just duplicate that, right? Shift D will duplicate it. And push escape so it's still in the same spot, and then just move the next one over and maybe shuffle the rotation around. I guess once the gold eyes are in there, it does look a little bit meaner with an upward nose. If it's just gonna look mean, might as well have the mean nose to match the gold. And we can do little refinements. Keep going back and forth until you get the one you want. Could have used some spheres for the eyes as well, because coal is a natural product, so it's usually smoothed off from water. A lot of it is, but others just have rough edges. And think about what you're making and kind of try to match that scenario. Because now we need something for arms. Oops. So for that, I will add in a cube, or not a cube, a cylinder. Once again, way too big. So S and scale that down. Something like that. I'm gonna do SX and scale it way in on the X, and SY, scale it way in on the Y. Or with it selected, can come over to the transform data and I know about how big I want that. Because that needs to be a stick for the arm. So probably like 0.03. I'll try 0.04. That might be a little bit too big still. So I'll scale it down even more. So it's going to look like a stick. That'll work. And rotate just outward to begin with. And like we saw, when we can add a material in there, a new material. Looks like a good stick color. It's kind of a random thing. But when you get the starting point about right, kind of move it to where it's going to start, where you think it's going to start at. I'll do a little bit of overlap. And now I'll go in edit mode and do that extrusion thing like we saw earlier to make the rest of the stick. So select just that in face, and you can do that by choosing all those vertices that make up, that define that face at the end. Then E to extrude, and maybe shuffle that around in a little so that it looks like some randomly shaped stick. E to extrude. That'll work. Remember, we are gonna animate it too. So we'll put the bones in here so we can position it anywhere we want. So we could just come straight out and deal with positions with the bones later. The one thing you wanna do lots of extrusions, because the more, like in the case of a cylinder, the more little rings you have, the better it will be. If we just did one thing the entire length of the arm, there's no spots in the middle for it to bend around. The edges are what can bend. Right, we adjust where the vertices are in space. So if all we have is the beginning and end, there's nothing in between to allow for any movement. That'll probably work, except for the end of the stick, so it looks like a hand. So what I'm gonna do is kind of zoom in here somewhere and push K for the knife thing, and I'll just kind of make a couple random splits. That'll work. I'll do a cut there. And then I'll push K again and do a cut up here. And just make some extra little things there at the end that can be extruded separately. So remember, scroll wheel is the main one, navigation thing. So obviously scrolling in and out, and shift and scroll will handle your panning. And then the scroll wheel and moving the mouse will do the rotations. So you just want to find a good spot where you can see all the vertices you want to select and grab those. See how that freeform selection is kind of nice. You can just highlight just the area you want. And then I'll extrude that one and move this little menu out of the way. And kind of put it in some random spot. Because in the end, I just want these things away from each other. Yeah.
Whenever you're cutting up stuff, how do you get out of the knife?
Oh, enter. Sorry. Make the cuts and then push enter when you're done with the knife. So now I'll select one of these other fingers. So I'll just grab the vertices that make up that shape. And if I zoom out, notice I accidentally grabbed the vertices way up here. So I always want to kind of move slowly and carefully, because if I started moving this now, that's going to cause a problem with those extra ones that were selected. So just click somewhere off in empty space to unselect things and change your view, and then be careful to make sure you're only ever selecting the ones you want. All of these. So it's just that face, and usually it's a good idea to zoom out and spin things around so you can make sure you have the right things selected. Then I'll extrude that and kind of move it off in a random direction, like it's part of a stick. Oh, maybe scale that too. Scale way down. That way it starts to look like a finger. Two more to do there. So sort of the same process. Zoom in and out, adjust your angle till you're looking at just the right thing. When you get it selected, extrude it out, then push S to scale, make it a little smaller, and maybe move it off in a random direction, because it's just a stick somebody found for their snowman. We don't want that to be, we only want that to be so symmetrical. I guess we might as well do that last one. I'll go with 3 on that hand. Gives us a nice quick pass at it. We can come back and refine it later. Because just like we saw before, when we start developing our game, we need those quick scratch images. So we get that starting one, and the numbers also come important there. So when we start developing our game, and we have the numbers to give to the art department. Say, this is the size it needs to be. And then that final version, when the artist spends weeks getting every little detail absolutely perfect on it, it is the same, you want it to be the same size as the one you test your code with. Otherwise, that could be a big problem, right? So you want to track the numbers and type in values as much as possible. Treat it like programming, even though it is drawing, but draw like a programmer. Think of it that way. Keep track of all that stuff. And that'll work. We could do another one, but I'm just gonna come over here and hit Shift D and duplicate this arm again. So I'm gonna duplicate that. And then I'm gonna push, then I'm hit S to scale it until it flips all the way around. Or I could do it here. So the X scale on that overall object is a positive 0.2. So if I came in here and made that negative, it now points in the opposite X direction. And the Y, if I make that negative, whoops. We'll make this one negative. One of those didn't need negative. Which one? I think the Y. I'll keep the Y positive. Oh, maybe just the Z needed negative there. Keep that. I can rotate it with the mouse. That would work as well. I'll just hit R and rotate it until it gets about where the other arm would be. There we go. We got our little snowman animation in there. And now that I say the clock, I skipped the feet because I think what Winston suggested earlier, I think I'm gonna do that. We can cover the concept of animation by waving the arms around and turning the head, right? But it's just more of that same thing. Bring in the other balls to make the feet and more, put some more bones in to animate it. But we're restricted on time, so that kind of gets our basic snowman shape going. So I'm gonna hit save, which I probably should have saved this a while ago, and call it snowman. And go ahead and save that. Probably should have saved that a while ago. That was a lot of work to have not saved this yet. But do those steps make sense? So we just start with the pieces. We just start with those basic primitive shapes and we can modify them, combine them any way we want, and build up that final version we want. And now the animation is similar to what we did the other day. And in general, a lot of people think the 3D animation is easier than the 2D. We do it the same way, but we don't have to adjust and think ahead, kind of like drawing. We don't have to worry about shading or angle if we do the 3D model. We just do the 3D model and take a picture of it if we need a 2D one. Then all we have to think about is where does the camera go? And we don't have to think about all the angles and the shading. We let the lights and the position of the camera handle that. Even for a 2D game. So a lot of people think that can be a lot easier. And same thing with animation. We have a full 3D model to put our skeleton in. And then our skeleton can move in the 3 dimensions it exists in instead of like that 2D flat surface where we just kind of did some some illusionary offsets so that parts of our skeleton didn't bleed together. But we do the same thing. We need to give it a skeleton, because just like you, our animation is handled by controlling the skeleton, and your skin follows. The skin, what we actually see, follows, which is the same thing how your body works. Your muscles move the skeleton, and your skin follows the skeleton. So if we go to add an armature, might remember I turned on that rigify thing. That's it. That can be a useful one. But we always start with a single bone. Looks like a great big one. And see how it's hidden? We need it inside of our character. If I move it there, we can't see it at all. So down in once a bone is there, our first bone's there, we have these two controls for it. Must be in there. And the button that looks like a stick man, if you go in there under viewport display, and you might have just noticed that I didn't bother to memorize where that was. I remembered the section where it was, and both of those have an option called viewport display. So the one that looks like a stick man has viewport display and has this button in front. So that way the arm is what always, the armature or the bone is what always shows, because that's not going to show in the final version anyway. That's just a graphical representation of the data, of the control data. So we want to position that first one in a good spot. So I'm thinking for each of the main snowballs, we'll do one bone in each one would cover everything. And then some bones coming out for the arms. So this only needs to really interact with that bottom snowball. So I hit scale and bring it down to a good size in place where it looks like it's going to control just that bottom snowball. And then from one bone, we want to build the rest of our skeleton, our skeleton. So unlike building up the mesh like we just did with a lot of different pieces, you always want to build your skeleton from one bone. That way it's a single item. Otherwise you have multiple skeletons to deal with, and that gets considerably more difficult to animate. We lose the purpose of doing that. So I always start with one bone, and we get that bone in place. Go to edit, and we can select either end of the bone or the entire bone itself. Select one of the ends, and I like to have the little arrows on. I think it makes it easier to see. And I'll just push E and extrude it out just a little. Well, I'll just bring it up. All right. I was going to get highly detailed. We can punch in numbers and stuff, but hit E and extrude it out in the Z direction. Spin it around, make sure you're in the right spot. That looks good. For the middle snowball, E, extrude one out for the head. I'm going to go ahead and E and extrude one out for the top hat as well. That way, when the head tilts the top hat, to make sure if we tilt this bone to make the head spin or turn or something, it assures the hat will go with it. Come back out to about where the shoulder is. I'll hit E and make a short extrusion to get to the start of where that arm is. Up there, and that's just a connecting piece. Now I'll do E and extrude one bone up to that next joint, because the next place we could possibly bend is where that little crease is from the extrusions and making the stick. Bring it into position and hopefully, what I just did there, those first few pieces, that looks easier than the other day, right? Because the other day we had to center it on that plane, because we just had the 2D image and it's kind of hard to get to just the right spot and move it, and it was spinning weird. But now, we just put it in the middle of that shape. Extrude down to about that next little joint. That's the next spot we could possibly bend this shape at. That one looks like it went too far out. Right there. And extrude one down here. Get it in the, try to get it close to the center of each one, and then I'll do one for each finger. You can see that there is an awful lot of back and forth, check different angles, because it often looks different depending on which angle you're looking at it from, which shouldn't really be a surprise because that's the way things really behave, right? So I'll come back up here. I guess I'll call that the palm or something, and extrude one to control that middle finger there. Make sure you look at lots of different angles. And get it in the right position, and one more finger there. From over here, it looks like it's in the right spot, but that's not even close, is it? Let's go way over here. Oh, that was a good place to see it. You can see, depending on what angle you're looking at it from, it might look like it's in the right spot, but as you keep turning it, you suddenly realize that it's way off from where you thought it was. That one takes a lot of practice, especially when you get to those like little finer spots. Like the general arm, that's just try to get it as close as you can. When we get down to like those fingers at the end pointing in different directions, you want to check a whole lot of different angles to make sure you have the bone in the right spot. And now the same thing for the other arm. Go back up here and extrude something down just to get to the starting point for that arm. That looks like a good place to start. So extrude down to where we can actually bend the thing at. And you also probably notice pretty quick that the more bones we get on there, the harder they are to see. So that's not our only shape. Over in the one that looks like a stick man, we could also change it to like a stick. And kind of look at them this way instead of that big shape, or just look at the whole envelope of what they cover, or just a simple wire structure might be the easiest one to see. So you can change the view. Sometimes that's necessary to kind of tell what you're looking at. And keep making little adjustments till it gets in the spot you want it to be. Or zoom in and out, lots of different angles. E to extrude one down here, which this one really needs to be in the middle of the hand. The fingers all come out somewhat correctly. So this is one of the very, once you get your shape drawn, this is the slow tedious one, because you want to make sure you have everything in just the right spot. Because once we make that assignment and make that skeleton the parent of the skin, our skin's gonna follow, so we want to make sure all the bones and the joints between the bones are in the correct spot so that it will follow correctly. I think that'll basically come. So you can see it's a slow, somewhat tedious process. So what would probably be a good idea right now is hit save. And now got the skeleton in place, and start waving the arms around, and building the head back and forth, get some animations in there. Really, really quick. We saw how to do that the other day. And there's going to be great animations. I'm gonna let y'all play with them. When we start making a game next week, we'll figure out exactly which ones we need. So it's probably a good idea to go ahead and hit save, and then save as, so that we can get back to this if we need to make adjustments. That way we don't have to undo all the way back a long ways if something turns out to just being the majorly wrong issue. Standard procedure though, right? Always work on a copy. It's like, okay, it looks like we're at a good spot. So I'll call this snowman next step, or snowman with so the snowman has the rigging, so this is snowman with rigging. So we have that, so we can get back to this if we need it. And now we can work with either one. I'm gonna go ahead and open up the original snowman one. And make sure I only have one layer file open. Okay, so I'm back in the original and have this state saved, so we can get back to this point with no problem if we need to. Does anybody remember which one we select first to make the parent-child relationship?
Skeleton, right?
Do we even have to remember? Because it gives us a different menu each time, right? So we select the skeleton. Oh, we have to go back to object mode. So back in object mode, if we select the skeleton and then hold shift and the skin, if we push Control P, there's the smaller options. So it's always parent last. The one we want, so we get different menus. The one we select last is the big one. Oh, there's one other thing. We have a whole bunch of shapes here. We don't want a whole bunch of shapes. We only want one. So this is also another example of it. So I select that top cone, not really worried about which one it is, and come all the way down. It's like this one. So I've got all of those snowmen done, and cone, the individual cone was first, and sphere 002 was last. So I push Control J to turn that into one thing. Notice which way it went. It all collapsed into the one selected first. Then here, if we take the skin, so now we have one snowman. If we start moving that, all the pieces move together. We need the same thing to happen with our armature. So it's like the snowman, hold shift and hit the skeleton. And then if we push Control P as in parent, we get that option with the armature before. So we want, one way to remember it is, well, it's really easy to check both. Right, that's one more thing to remember, and it's not hard to just check them both real quick. But we want the menu that goes with the skeleton, or we want the armature menu, so that's the one we want to select last. The thing we select last changes the menus. So here, go with automatic weights. These are usually really good on 3D. They messed up on us yesterday, but automatic weights are usually really good on 3D. So now the armature, we can see from the hierarchy of how we have to expand it. The armature is the parent of our snowman. So now that it's all one shape, I'll go ahead and rename it. All those shapes combined together to make our snowman. We build it up from simple primitive pieces. Kind of like the same way we program, right? There are a bunch of simple primitive things that we build up big, huge, complex programs from. Let's see, if we select the skeleton, then our menu will have a pose mode. So if I grab a bone and rotate it, looks like it's moving that arm pretty well. Grab this one, rotate it, and that looks pretty good. It's moving the arm and then a little bit of overlap. Back and forward. I don't see anything else moving. If I grab this and rotate the head, we left an eyeball behind. Everything else looks okay. Rotate back and forward. Yeah. So the rest of the head stays together.
Control J to
join. And then Control P to parent. So it looks like that little piece of coal one of the eyes got left behind. So that's what we saw yesterday with the weight painting. So I think this is the one you were thinking of. We want to apply weight to a particular area of the mesh. That's on the menu for selecting the mesh. So we want to select the skeleton first and then the mesh. The one we select last is the one we get the menu options for. And there are a lot of buttons here. We're going weight paint. And if we hold shift and click a bone, now we're looking at this bone. And we can see everything up there. It all looks good except for that eye. This piece of coal should definitely be moving with that head bone. So just come in here and just start adding colors. At this point, it's probably all going to move, but I'll go ahead for something like that. I'll go ahead until it's all like red or orange. And definitely the entire piece of coal is going to move with that bone now.
could you join that?
Oh, it was already joined.
Right, because when you move the snowman.
Yes. Yeah, there's a bunch of menus I have to dig through and find it. But it did join correctly. It just it didn't get the weighting, so that bone doesn't affect it. So yeah, the weight, it's weight as in weighted average, the percentage that particular piece of the mesh is impacted by a particular bone. So now if I go back, select the skeleton so we can get to pose mode. I'll select the head bone and rotate that around. That's good. So we can get a couple animations. One's probably good here for this class, just starting off. So let's go over, hit save. And over in the animation tab. We're looking at a dope sheet. I don't know why the colors didn't come in here. I'll do this, will that carry over? There's colors on that one. view. The menus are hidden. I'm not sure where the menu is, but we can see. We can see the movement there at least. And we'll turn this skeleton off in a minute. So we're looking at dope sheet. You want to switch that to action editor? Because usually our model will have more than one animation, right? Typical game character is going to have a walking animation, a running animation, a standing still animation. Usually call those idle, crouching, jumping. We'll have lots of different ones. So go to animation tab and switch this little option to action editor. And then here in the middle, we have a new button. So we'll create a new animation. And this little shield here, you always want to click that. That means fake user, because it's going to try to optimize things. And sometimes optimizations only include the animation that's applied. So what we want to do is create a fake user so that when the computer goes to optimize things, it thinks every one of our animations is in use. We're only going to make one here. I'll call it waving, because we're just going to wave the arms around and nod the head. That'll be enough to show the steps, right? And I'm going to send you all these files so you can extend it more with your own choices. So pull up something on the view. Okay, that looks good. Oh, and notice, before I move on, notice there's a drop down with this. So we can make lots and lots of animations. Just remember, you always want to see that F there. And make sure your animations all apply to a fake user so that the computer doesn't try to optimize them out. Like, oh, this isn't being used. It could just be deleted because computers will do that. And sometimes they won't even ask. So we need to set up animations just like we did on 2D. And a lot of people find the 3D version of this easier because 2D, we had to modify how we're thinking about that stuff. In 3D, we're actually thinking about moving an object. So push A to select all the bones. And when they're all selected, push I to insert a keyframe for our transform data. Insert our location, rotation, and scale. And I always like to do two things. We want it looping. So let's say I'm gonna do 23 frames. Whatever this animation is going to turn out being 23 frames long. So next thing I'm going to do is click here and go to frame 24. So I'm one frame past the end, and I'm going to insert. Your buttons do different things in different places, so make sure your mouse is there in that layout view. I'm going to insert another keyframe for location, rotation, and scale. So now frame 1 and frame 24 are perfect matches. We go back to the beginning of frame 23. So frame 23 is one frame before we get back to that perfect match. Then we just need something in the middle. I'm just going to do one today. We saw a couple the other day. I'll choose something around the middle, around 12. So maybe halfway through it, this arm is rotated up and forward. This arm's rotated down and forward as well. And I'll take the head and rotate that back. So a couple small movements. And I'll push A and I to insert the keyframe. Select everything, insert that keyframe. And now the computer should fill in all those gaps between those movements. So I'll send this out and y'all can start playing with those animations. We have an hour and a hour and a half left on our scheduled time. Definitely something to click around with. I will send these files out in just a few minutes so you can start moving that skeleton around and play with the animations. I'll send you that human one. You can add a skeleton to that. Try some of that. It definitely takes some practice. But that'll at least give us a little moving thing. And then you can do the same thing we did the other day, where you set up a camera and a light and take a picture of it, and then you have a 2D image for your 2D game, which we're gonna do for Game Maker next week. But that was a whole bunch of things, and this one takes practice, so Game Maker will go really, 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 really quick. I would recommend practicing this for when you think about game dev for the next couple days and get that good base for 3D modeling. Because that is definitely something you will see in game development, right? Our worlds and everything will be the same. We'll look at some making a world before long. But there's how we do our animations. You can do stuff all day long. We did transform data, so you can, so you're asked earlier, Winston, he's still there, yeah. Winston asked earlier about sliding around. So you could move the overall thing. You could, maybe the snowman needs an attack for your game. So your animation includes moving 5 meters forward very, very quickly, and then slowly back to that center starting position, right? So then it's like an attack from that snowman, just from the overall movement. Maybe you want to include that. But any place we move that skeleton, the skin will follow it. So that's how we do those. That animation, and in the basic view down at the bottom, you should also have a play button to run that animation here. But when you don't want to see it, just hit the little eyeball on the armature to turn off the armature, so we only see the skin. And then we have our little, I guess, dancing snowman. The steps are there. We can probably do. That'll work. The steps are there. Carry out those steps, practice around with them. It does take some practice. And when yours aren't going as smoothly as the one I did up here today, remember, I've been doing this for longer than most of y'all have been alive. Most of y'all were born after 1994, the first time I did a 3D model. I really, really enjoyed it. And then I had an actual college degree that included lots and lots of formal training in 3D modeling for engineering. So it included the precise physics, very precise engineering precision physics of 3D modeling, not just making it look okay. It had to simulate actually making the piece and breaking it accurately so that the engineers would know what needs fixed before sending it to the factory. That absolute precision. So I had a lot of training, lots and lots of practice with this and practice. Now's a good time to start getting that practice. Just click around, do random things, make some pictures. Maybe start with simple things. Maybe we did a snowman because we had a short time. A couch. Right? Couch wouldn't be too hard to make, or a chair. You might need those for props. A table. Table seems like a fairly good starting point, and you're not going to need to animate a table. At most, you would flip the table over. So not a whole lot of animations there. So think of
Pee-wee's Playhouse.
yes. Oh yeah. I guess you could that if you want to do. There are reasons to, but try simple things. Don't jump right into the character you've been thinking for your masterpiece of a game, because that's probably going to be a complicated one to start with. Think of simple things you can start with. A phone, right? As a cube with that sunken in face, and then add materials so that there's like a rough material for that outer surface, the drop case, and then really smooth material, highly reflective material for the thing. Little things like that. Try to start with simple ones and build up to more complicated ones. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help as always. That's my recommendation, but obviously it's a game dev class. So if you want to jump right into the game engine and do game stuff and use pre-existing images, that's fine too. I'm always happy to help. Let me know if you have any questions. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up though? Okay, I assume the silence there means no questions. If you have any, let me know. Y'all have a great weekend. I will see you next Monday. Or if y'all, I will see you in a couple hours. Good evening, class.
Yeah, thanks.